Okay, and I'm going to share my screen. Cool. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see your faces. I think some of you already know each other, but I don't really know everyone. So I would like to do a round of introduction, if that's okay, super quick. I promise it's not going to be a bunch of questions. Just your name very briefly. What are you working on today? What's your job or what's your project right now? And I would like to know, why did you want to join this workshop? What sparked your curiosity? And two very, very nice questions. If you can describe a recent experience that you had with a product or a service that was really good and one that was very, very bad. Just describe it, what it was, what product was, what service was, and why was it bad and why was it good. Okay, so I'll start off just to give you an example and then continue from there. So I'm Ananda, as you know. I'm an experienced designer. I'm currently working for a digital design agency in Barcelona. We specialize in banking products. So we do applications, online platforms, and websites for banks located in Saudi Arabia. And I'm very new at this position, this job in this area, in this field, and I absolutely love it. One of the reasons why I'm doing this workshop today for you girls is because I want to figure out ways to share this content to people that don't really know what it is and what it means. And I hope that more people use UX UI design principles in their daily jobs, even without being UX designers. So I hope it helps you in your projects. My good experience recently was that I was able to cancel a subscription in a click, and that was amazing. It was really surprising. I actually left them a feedback saying, thanks for letting me cancel it in a click. That's amazing. And a very bad experience, and I always talk about this experience because I think people can relate, is these packaging for lotions that are super long and you can never access the bottom of the lotion. I usually end up cutting the packaging, which I find horrible. And I don't really understand why they develop these weird packagings. So as you can see, it can be a service, it can be a product, whatever it is that you feel that it was a good experience or a very bad experience. Okay, who wants to go next?
Come on, Deborah.
Okay, but I'm talking. I am Deborah. I am the founder of Planet Venus. I am very curious to be in this event about UX UI because for me, doesn't sound me nothing, and I am very, very curious what is, and I'm sure I'm gonna like it. But good experience I have. Really, I don't know very much now.
It's all right. So you can think about it. You can share it later if you want.
Okay, perfect. Because tomorrow we are still thinking. Okay. Then I pass the voice to Valentina.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Valentina, and I'm working as brand strategist and graphic designer for different brands. One of this one, it is Planet Venus. And one good experience that I had recently, it was yesterday. I tried to buy a present for my mother's birthday. It is tomorrow. So I wanted to buy her a perfume online, and I did it in Promo Pharma, which is a very big brand website for pharmacy and all that stuff. And it works super quickly, super easy, and the product has been already delivered. So very good one. And a bad experience, it was, I tried to go to the doctor here in Formentera. I live in a small island. And even though I went 4 times to the hospital, I wasn't able to go to visit my doctor. So terrible.
Terrible. We can relate. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you.
Who wants to go next?
Well, I can go. My name is Victoria. I am responsible for, I'm director of sales and marketing for a hotel chain. The reason I'm here is the same as the previous workshop I attended with Deborah. Basically, I have marketing under my responsibility, but a lot of marketing, I haven't done that much before. So I need to get a better understanding of what this team is doing actually. And I mostly think of user experience in digital world in the first place. And when it comes to my own experiences, I'd say I have, I just thought of how good easy Google makes it for you to leave a review. on any type of experience you've had, restaurants. And what a very bad experience I've had is agencia tributaria, when I'm trying to fix my data.
Oh yes, I agree.
On their website is impossible, and then you can't, nothing works.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Great, thank you, Victoria. Who wants to go next? Hi, Mark, welcome. Hi, Lisa, welcome. We're doing round of introductions quickly.
I can go next if you like. I work in an insurance company and I'm responsible for some accounts. So as we're also offering a web portal, UX UI design is becoming more and more relevant. So I'm very keen to learn more. And a good experience I had was that I ordered plants online and they came in super good shape, well packaged with little care forms, so you can keep them alive better. So that was very mindful and I really liked that. And a bad experience that I just reordered my face masks from Decathlon, but they changed the model. So it's a completely different product. And I now have a massive pack of masks that I can't use and not sure if I even can return them.
Oh, no.
Okay. So that's from me.
Great.
Thank you.
Who else?
I can go if you want. I'm Daniela. I am an independent business advisor since like 12 years, and it has changed a lot. So I'm trying to swap and study, trying to understand what to connect. A very good experience I had with a shop on Etsy. There was a small with the address, and the seller was very rated in selling it. Bad experience, I broke a window and a window was broken, and it was mid-August and we were in need of repairing it. And there was this company, a serious one apparently, but they would come and say, yeah, we are arriving, we are coming, and they would always stood us up. And it was so annoying because you stay at home and you're waiting for them and they won't. It was really bad. It was like trying to fetch them. So it was really bad.
Great, thank you. Who else?
Me. Sorry, but my English is not so good.
That's all right. Not good.
I am graphic designer, but I feel like my knowledge is very stuck. It's very old. So I think that I need to refresh, and that's why I'm curious about UI UX design. And I think bad experience it is with Bising. Because sometimes, yeah, because sometimes in the app it says that there are some I don't know available by, and when I go there, they are broke.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Yes, it's very bad because many times I had to move a lot trying to find something. And I think a good experience, I don't know, now I think in most of the restaurants, they have the menu. You can see through the code bar. I think it's good because you don't have to wait until the waitress comes.
Yes, totally.
That's true, yeah, cool. Cool, we still have Lisa, Clara.
Hi. Well, I don't work in design. I'm actually a translator, but I do work in for the marketing sector. So I'm interested in anything to do with design and marketing and user experience. So you're talking. I see. Okay, you start. Sorry, I'm late. By the way.
No worries. No worries. So just share with us. Just share a good experience and a bad experience.
Well, the problem is the bad experiences stick in my head more than the good experiences. So I'm trying to think of a good experience, and Nothing really comes to mind at the moment. I'd have to think about that one. Bad experiences, I think, is ordering something online and they say they're going to turn up on such and such a day and it doesn't arrive. With no communication or anything, and then you chased it up and they said, oh, we didn't have somebody around at the time, and it's like, but I think that's kind of a common problem.
It is.
Unfortunately, very common problem.
When you're able to think about a good experience, just share it with us, because I'm curious to hear.
I will.
Who else? Who else? I see that Clara just joined us too. Welcome, Clara.
Hi, so my name is Clara, and I work in the high jewelry industry as a quality controller and a designer. And basically, I know it's very random. My partner is a data scientist, and he spoke about the UX UI, and it kind of ringed something inside me to be curious about it and see if something that I would go through, like do a complete change and do that, or yeah, just like looking into it. And yeah, good experience, I would say. Lately, my friend had a baby in Barcelona. Since I couldn't be there, I sent her flowers through, it's called Interflora, which is a company that sends flowers. And it was fantastic. They would send you an email when it's ready, when they're delivering, like very precise. And then a bad one would be Santander. Like their online webpage is from the dinosaurs, is terrible. If you compare BBVA and other brands, it's just Santander is just way behind this. And I don't know if it's here in the UK, but it's terrible. No.
Cool. Thank you, Clara. Who else? Cami, you want to say something?
Yes, of course. Well, I am Camila. I do digital marketing and also work in Planet Menus as moderating, generating content, all that. I heard a lot about UX design and UI. So that is why I am very interested in the event of today. A bad experience is that today they were coming to connect my internet in my house, and I have an appointment at 9 in the morning and ending coming at 3 in the afternoon. Maybe Deborah, can you put down your, because I heard my, okay, thank you.
There's some echo going on.
Yes. Well, and a good experience, I don't know, living here in Barcelona all the days, I have a good experience. I don't know.
Yes, that's good. That's a great one.
Yes.
I think we, with the ones that live in Barcelona, agree.
Yes.
And I see Clara is here. I don't know if you want to say something, Clara from Ideate. I don't know if she can hear us. Well, let's see if she join us later. She can introduce herself. Ah, there she is. Do you want to say something?
Sorry.
No, no worries.
Yes, I am having lunch at that time.
Oh my God, busy as always.
Yes. But sorry for the late.
No worries.
And here to learn.
Okay, great, cool, great. So all that we shared here, I think everyone has introduced themselves. Great. All that we share here for the UX UI designer is gold. Everything that you said, every single reaction, emotion, it's insight and it's gold for us. And you see, as we go on this workshop, you see that we're going to use it quite a lot. I have a question for you, and just raise your thumbs up or down if you agree with it or if you disagree with it. Do you think that collectively we can agree on good or bad experiences? I see some up, most up, and we have some down. Cool. I think in this tiny group, we would be able to agree on some good and bad experiences, but generally on bigger groups, it's actually quite hard to say that everyone is going to enjoy a service or everyone is going to enjoy a product. So to define good and bad design is actually quite difficult. For that reason, even before user experience existed, the concept of user experience existed, there was a German designer called Dieter Hams that decided to define a set of design principles that would help him answer the question of what is good design. He came up with 10 very simple phrases to answer to that question. So good design for him was innovative. It made a product useful. It made it aesthetic. It made it understandable, unobtrusive, honest, long-lasting, thorough, environmentally friendly, and as little design as possible. So as you can see, this is very universal. I think we agree with almost everything that it's in here. And if you're not going to be able to apply anything that we talk on this workshop because you don't have time or resources to do it, I recommend you to either use these principles or use a set of principles on your own to do a good design or a good product. Right now, if you type on Google design principles from Dieter Hams, you're going to see a variety of new redesigns of these principles. A lot of designers have come up with different principles that fit their context. So I give you the motivation to do your own set of principles to define good design for you. But this was a time where design was not taking into consideration user experience or user information, user opinion, right? I get 2 clicks. Great. So nowadays we have the wonderful world of the internet, and we can actually evaluate everything that the users say and do and act when they interact with the product. So user experience design, in a simple way of saying, is absolutely everything that affects a person's interactions with a product or a service. Ooh, just a second, there's someone coming. When we talk about everything, we talk about everything that falls into 3 major pillars. Psychology, which is the way you feel when you interact with the product. So your emotions, are you nervous? Are you excited? Are you happy? Are you frustrated? This is the psychology part. Then we have the science part, which is how that product works. The buttons, what do you need to, let's say a packaging, what do you need to do for that package to work? Let's say a CTA, everyone knows the CTA. Where is that CTA placed? That is the science part. And then we also have the art part. I know that art sounds a bit grand when you say the art part, but especially for the digital products, the visual aspect plays a huge role. That's the first impression you're going to give to the user when he sees the product that you're showing. Especially in the digital world, the art section has a lot of psychology and science in it too. And a good example that I like to give always is color psychology. Color is something very subjective. Depends whether you're on the place that you're showing your product, different cultures will interpret colors in different ways. So there's also a touch of science when you choose certain colors. All of these 3 pillars, they fit into a set of questions that you have to ask and a set of informations that you have to ask in order to define them. If there's anything that I say here in English that you need a Spanish translation, just let me know. And if I'm speaking too fast, also just tell me to breathe.
I don't know, Ananda, if we can make some questions during your presentation. Please. Or you prefer to leave them by the end, because now you have some questions on the chat.
Please.
Lisa did ask you something about honest design.
Lisa, feel free to say it right now, because I cannot see it while I'm sharing the screen. So just feel free to.
Oh no, I don't mind if you want to cover them at the end, because otherwise we're going to be constantly interrupting.
Please do. Let's make this a conversation. I prefer that. Let's do it.
Okay. Yeah, I was in the first slide. It said honest design. I don't really understand what they mean by honest design. Mm-hmm.
Honest design. This is his principles for what design means. That's why I said it's really nice that you define your own principles. Principles are not rules. Principles are just a set of guidelines that a designer will make to make sure that him and his team understand their own guidelines. This is a good base if you don't have any idea what your principles are. But I actually skipped this slide, but I did my own principles. When I was first starting in the design world, I said, okay, he has a good set of principles, but for me, there's some things that are more important. Let's say, for example, for me, design needs to be inclusive. Every single product and service that I design needs to make sure that includes women, includes men, includes people of color. So that for me is a very important principle. That might not be very important for the product and service that you are doing. So this is when I said, if you are going to start a product and you don't have a UX designer to help you out, the only thing that you need to have is a set of principles that will guide your decisions. In his case, honest is that in design, especially in digital design nowadays, there's some things that we call dark design, which kind of guide you to do a certain purchase or a certain thing that you actually don't want to do. It happens a lot. Exactly. Exactly. It happens a lot when you're trying to cancel a product and they put the cancel in a very tiny button, and in a big button in green it says pay here or something like that. So you get confused. It's actually quite normal to happen. So this is how he envisioned it, that the honest to be. In nowadays, you'll see, if you actually look for the Apple design principles, they have really cool ones too. So you can see other references of these principles in other big companies. Any other question? Cool.
No.
Great. Awesome. So when we're talking about these three big pillars, the way we're going to answer to these, that we're going to fill these three pillars with information is by answering a set of questions. This is a very generic, these are very generic questions that I hope every founder, every project manager is asking themselves when they're working with a new project or a new service or a new product. So you do need to understand what is the product that you're working with, why people are using it, who is using it, and the context, when, where, and how. Usually, founders and early employers of companies are the ones answering to these questions. And that's fine. That's not a problem, especially if you don't have resources to hire a UX designer. It's okay that you answer them. But what happens quite common is that the goal of the founder is very different of the goal of the user. And that's when the user experience designer comes in. The user experience designer has as a main objective, as a main goal in his role, to advocate for the users. He's kind of like the flag of the user nation, basically. He's gonna make sure that every single thing that the user says is taken into consideration. Within the context of a company, the designer also needs to make sure that he's taking into consideration the business needs and the business goals, and also the technical possibilities. You cannot, for example, deliver a product with drones if you don't have drones. So you need to make sure you're observing these two elements as well. But the main focus, I like to say that the designer has a 360-degree view with the focal point in the user at all times. This is one of the reasons why there's so many people from different areas switching to the UX UI design world, because you don't necessarily have to have a graphic design background or any design background in order to do this job. Actually, if you have experience with business, for example, that might give you an advantage because you're able to do both. You're able to understand the user and the business. Does that make sense? Anyone has any question?
It makes sense.
Great, cool. Now, how does a designer make sure that he's always putting the user at first and that he's also taking into consideration these two other aspects? Designers usually have a set of hard skills, so they usually know certain platforms and certain technologies. They also have a set of soft skills, a team player, communication, adaptability, and so on and so on. And they will use each of these skills depending on the context and depending on the project they're working. The key thing here, especially for a UX designer working in a company, is to make sure that they're using these tools at the right time. And for that, they usually use a methodology or a design process. If you've been to any design interviewing for a design position, usually the person interviewing you will ask you, what's your design process? What process do you use to reach conclusions or to define a solution? And they will give you a certain set of processes they have. One of the most famous one of the methodologies that it's most used by designers is design thinking. I'm sure you've heard of design thinking before. Has anyone heard of design thinking? Great. Design thinking is a methodology created by Ideate. Ideate is one of the most famous design companies in the world. They developed this technology in the 80s, actually. So they made sure to grab a bunch of tools and skills that the designers already have and integrate it into a methodology where The business needs are taken into consideration, the user needs are taken into consideration, and the technology is also taken into consideration. The design thinking process nowadays is used by founders, marketeers, salespeople, designers, and everyone, because it just makes sense as a process where you see problems from very early on and you're able to iterate, to make changes as you go. It's also a process where you're able to test ideas before you implement it. So it makes quite cheap for companies to test new ideas, new services, before they invest money and time into putting the project or the product into production. Great. So what is design thinking? Design thinking is a process. I'm going to give you the steps one by one. If you have any questions in each of these steps, please stop me. What I'm going to try to do as well is to give you specific tools for each of these steps. So my idea with the workshop is not so much that you leave here as a UX designer, but that you can grab some of these tools to use on your daily lives. I think this is going to be very useful. I've heard some people that can use UX in their jobs. So this is the overall idea of design thinking. Design thinking has 5 steps, which are empathy, definition, ideation, prototypes, and testing. And as I said before, this is an iterative process, so you can always find a different insight and go back a step to make adjustments. This is not a definite process where there's an end, beginning and an end, sorry. Are we good? Are we ready to go into design thinking?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. So the first part, and honestly the most fun for me, is the empathy part. The empathy phase is where you understand who you are designing for. This is where you're going to ask these 6 questions that were in the previous slides: what, who, why, how, when, and where. And this is also where you're going to understand the context where you're working. So who are your competitors? What are the best practices? I have a great example. I see Clara is still there. I have a great example with Clara. We're working with the redesign project of her website right now. And we were doing this phase where we were trying to understand what her users were looking for into the website. And when I gave her the results, she said, "Oh, that's a great insight you had." And I answered to her, that was not my insight. I didn't even know that existed, actually. I didn't even think about it. That insight came from the user. The user said it so many times in the survey that we sent that they needed that function. That makes sense for us to put it. So that was a great moment also for me of realization of how the insights are super important. So in the case of Clara, because we're living a pandemic and it's really hard to do interviews, we did surveys. Surveys is usually when you already have a product and you want to validate an idea. You create a set of questions to make sure that the idea that you have makes sense. One of the best tools for me for surveys is the Lean Survey Canva. So make sure to Google it if you're interested. This is a Canva that gives you a structure. It gives you a map with really specific question that helps you create the perfect survey. If you've answered a survey before, you know that sometimes it's quite annoying to go question by question to answer it. So this kind of helps you create a survey that it's a bit more interesting for the user and that it will actually bring you good insights that you can use. Any questions? Great. Okay, the other option that you have when you're in this empathy phase is to do direct interviews. Direct interviews are quite hard because you need to make sure, well, if you're good at conversations, they're not that hard. If you have troubles with conversations, they might be very hard. The principle of interviews is to be a great listener. Make sure that you observe and listen to absolutely every single comma that the person is telling you. You don't really have to have a specific question in mind when you do an interview. It can just be an exchange of information. The idea of the interview is not necessarily to validate a point. The interview is more to give you insights of things that you didn't really think about. There's a very common way of doing interviews in design, which is called guerrilla interviews, which you basically have a question, you go outside the street and you ask people on the street what they think about it, what's their opinion about it. So you get someone really off guard, not prepared to answer you anything, and you just get the honest first reaction, which is really awesome. Great, and then we're gonna have field observation and benchmarking. Field observation is when you go with the user, you go with the person to the place where she's gonna purchase the product or go through a specific service, and you just observe how they interact with the product. This is a moment where you're not supposed to make any questions or interfere in any way. You're just gonna let them go through the way they would go on a normal day, and you were gonna make notes about it. This is a bit of a harder way of collecting insights. You need to be very patient and calm, but it can be useful in certain cases. And benchmarking, I think most of you would know benchmarking is just a way of figuring out what the competition is doing, best practices, and especially in digital products, it's really nice to see design patterns and things that could make sense for the products that you're creating. Great, so this is empathy. Any questions? We're good?
Everything's clear.
Awesome. So when you have enough information, and this is probably the phase that is going to take the longest, and it's normal that it takes really, really long, because the idea is that you need to have more information than you need. Is that you have so much information that you can have as many insights and as many conclusions as you want as well. So now the second step is going to be definition. This is when you're going to find the problems that were told to you, and you're going to find the people that you want to target. A great thing that I like to say always is that no one is going to be able to solve all problems for everyone. That doesn't exist. Maybe the person that invented bottled water is trying to do that, but I know some people that don't really like water, so I guess it's not for everyone. Don't attempt to do that. Don't attempt to do that, because that doesn't exist. Even people that say they will buy your product, at one point they might diverge. So try to focus into one product and one specific type of audience. That's really important when you're trying to find possible solutions. How are you going to do that? How are you going to define your problem, and how are you going to define your audience? There's tons of tools out there, but for me, the most important ones are the four tools here in the slide. The first one is empathy mapping. Empathy mapping is gathering the information that you had and separating into these fields. I know it's not so clear to see it, so if you have any questions, just let me know. But it's basically a Canva that lets you separate the information that you have into key areas. Things that your user sees, things that your user says, things that he thinks and feels, things that he needs, things that will be pains and gains. All of these separations will help you later on also to think about solutions. Why do you think it's important to separate it in this way, to have it in these categories? Anyone has input?
Maybe so that you don't forget about any area, that you consider all the different fields, basically.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anyone else?
Maybe makes you break down the whole situation and see if you're missing some point.
Yeah.
Or if you're focusing on the wrong stuff.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. One of the main reasons why you're going to do this is because usually when people tell you things, you tend to focus on the insights they're telling you. When you actually see the categories separated this way, you can think about other aspects of what they're saying. You can think about what they're seeing. You can think about what they're feeling. You can think about other things. As humans, we're very rational, we're very verbal, so we tend to focus on the wording. And the wording says more than just the words. So that is the main reason why this empathy map is really useful for the UX designer. There's also another tool that I didn't put here, but that can be useful, and that just reinforces this idea of the journaling. If you have a user that would be available to write down everything that he does during his day for a long time, a long period of time, you will see that he will probably say a lot of things, a lot of intentions that he wants to do, but that he's not necessarily doing what he says he wants to do. And a great example is exercise. Everyone says, oh, I would love to exercise 3 times a day, but that doesn't mean you're actually going to exercise 3 times a day. So if I'm a designer developing an exercise application, I really need to investigate a bit further on that information. Am I targeting people that already exercise, or am I targeting people that want to exercise? This will be completely different products. Does it make sense?
Yes, but for me, the hardest thing is how to recognize when they are lying or pretending to do something they really don't do.
Yes, that's a technique. Also, it's a technique on the interviews. You never ask people about their intentions. So the question is never, tell me about your exercise life. You're going to ask them, what was the last time you exercised? That tells you way more than tell me about your exercise life. Because if you're asking them in a generic way, they're going to try either to impress you or they're going to give you their intentions, right? If you ask them, what was the last time they exercised, and they tell you, 3 months ago, you know that person doesn't really exercise that often.
Okay.
Right? So it's also a way of guiding the conversation and guiding the interviews. Okay. That's why I said the lean canvas of the survey helps a lot, because the way they help you set these questions is to also guide you to get better answers that are not based in intentions and they are based on behaviors. That's what we're looking for.
Okay.
Any other question? Awesome. Great. So the next one is affinity diagrams. The affinity diagrams are essentially an empathy map, but they're not as defined as the empathy map. So they're a more generic way of distributing the information. Especially if you're working very, very fast, this is a quick way to make sure you have big groups of information gathered into one. There's no secret about this tool, is putting the information, the data that you have in Post-its. Actually, this Post-its that I'm showing here wouldn't be ideal because they have a lot of information in each of the Post-its. The ideal Post-it is maybe 2 or 3 words that defines that insight, and then you put it into a bigger group of information. But this is just to help you visualize all the information that you have, and that it can also give you some priority. It will happen very often that you will find a lot of problems when you're getting into research. And it's also very, very common that you cannot solve all the problems at once. So this is a good way of visualizing the problems and defining a priority. Which of these problems have more cases, or more people are talking about this problem? Or which of this problem actually makes sense for my business goals? So it's more a visualization tool than anything else. We're good? Awesome. Now, with these 2 tools, you should be able to already start drawing some conclusions. When you start drawing some conclusions, then you can start defining some things that will be important for the ideas, for the generation of ideas in the next step. One of the ways to have a very clear definition of your audience is to develop a user persona. And we have some marketing people on the call. Anyone wants to share with us what a user persona is? No? I see a no, a nodding head. No, it's
is the user persona just like basically your target profile?
That's a way of describing.
I mean, your target audience, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very realistic profile that kind of gives a general idea of what your audience is. It's actually quite common in UX design to see primary user persona, so your main target audience, a secondary user persona, and a tertiary user persona. We don't really recommend more than that, because then you're just trying to solve a lot of problems for a lot of people. But primary and secondary is quite common to see. So maybe I'm going to solve this big issue for the primary audience and a smaller issue for a smaller audience. The purpose of the user persona is also to help a design team or a marketing team in this case to always remember who you're solving the problem for, and to create a sort of connection with the user. Because if you're always talking in big numbers and big audiences, it's quite easy to lose touch, right? And to lose the connection with the user. So this, if you give it a face, a name, an age, frustrations and needs, it's just easier to relate. This example on the slide is a very good one. You'll see that the frustrations and the needs are very, very detailed. So you can actually, you probably know someone that fits into that profile. It needs to be very realistic, but it cannot be someone that you know. So one of the great tips that that you need to remember is that never put a name of a person that you know, because that's just too close. And try to make it always based on the insights that you gather on the research. Don't make assumptions. Never make assumptions. Everything you needs to have an argumentation or an explanation based on the insights that you gathered on the first phase. Any questions about user persona?
And Ananda, one question. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
What happens, for instance, with a product, a company, or a service that it's been designed for 2 or 3 different user personas? For instance, I know a brand who's doing a software for doctors, but also for patients and also for medical centers. So they want to achieve these 3 people.
Mm-hmm.
So is it good or bad to try to reach 3 different user personas?
In this case, I'm going to give it a very wild guess. I don't know the company, but in this case, I believe that they have different design teams working in different products. So they probably have a certain set of teams working for the different products. It's kind of like Airbnb. Airbnb has a team that focuses into the homeowners and another team that focuses in the experience that the renter will have. It's actually quite normal. If you're trying to focus these two big problems at once, it's normal that you will separate it into separate user personas. It's not a big issue. It's a bit uncommon to see a single designer trying to solve all of these problems alone, or one team trying to solve these problems alone. It's a bit harder. If you're working on your own project, I wouldn't recommend it, to be honest. It's quite easy to lose sight of what's the priority, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But that's a great question. Awesome. So the final part of this, once you have your user persona in mind, is to define a problem statement. A problem statement is a question that will help you, again, think about solutions. The way you define a problem statement is super simple. You're going to add the user. So let's say here we're talking about Airbnb. Travelers need a way to find housing or to find a vacation home because they don't want to sleep on the street. I'm just shooting something in the air, but it's as simple as that. Of course, you cannot guess this information. All 3 things in here will be insights that you gather from the previous activities. But the problem statement is as simple as that. Why do you need it? Again, to make sure that you're always focusing in one problem and in one user and in the main insight that you've gathered. It's quite easy to be tempted to try to solve everything at once, and it's also quite easy to add as many insights as you can into the problem statement. It's okay if you do that, but it's harder to think about solutions if you do that. Another way of doing problem statement is to ask a how might we question, which would just be the same structure, but the start would be how might we solve a problem for the user that needs a specific solution because of this issue. Exactly the same structure, but just in the form of a question. Okay. Now it's the fun part. This is my favorite part. Time to think about solutions. An important point before starting this this phase is quite common, especially for early designers, to start thinking about solutions in the first phase. Or you probably heard this before. Oh, I have a wonderful idea for a product. That's quite common, right? I think we've all had wonderful ideas for products. And when you do that, it's quite easy to fall in love with an idea And then when you see that your insights don't match it, you feel very frustrated. So do not think about any ideas, or try not to think about any ideas or solutions until you get to this point. When you get to this point, when you get to the ideation part, run as wild as you can. You'll see here that you have worst possible idea and crazy eights as an example, and that they are exactly what they say. Worst possible idea is an exercise to think about the worst possible idea. An idea that wouldn't make sense, that it's just too futuristic or too crazy or whatever it is. Think about it, because once you put that idea up there, everything else that you will think will make more sense. It's just a tricky psychological way of brainstorming. Brainstorming, of course, is a great way of finding solutions. And if I may add a couple of tips for brainstorming. Brainstorming, especially in design, should be a place where no criticism is done, no judgment is done. This is a place where everyone is going to encourage wacky and crazy ideas. And we want quantity over quality at all times. Also, a very important point for me is that there's a nice rule in improv theater where they say there's no. You can never say no to an idea. You always have to say yes and. So always try to build on top of each other's idea. This just creates a nice environment, a creative environment to produce more and more possible solutions. And if you have the ability to draw and sketch, try to be as visual as possible. It's a good way to explain what you're thinking when you're actually putting in a paper. I had a great design teacher that said, if you don't put it in a paper, if you don't design, it doesn't exist. So it's just a good way to make sure that you can explain what you're thinking. Then we have the Crazy Eights. The Crazy Eights is a very, very designer's tool, but if you like to sketch, it's a good way also to think about possible solutions. The Crazy Eights is basically a sketching exercise. When you will sketch one screen per minute. When the minute is done, you go to the next idea. When the minute is done again, you go to the next idea. So you are going to select one specific screen, and this is specific for the digital products. And you're just going to sketch it the way you think it and go to the next one. This we do it a lot in teams. So if a lot of people have a lot of ideas of how a homepage should look like, this is a great exercise to do together. Great. Then we go to prototyping. Prototyping is very simple. It's just developing those ideas, selecting some of those ideas and developing in a cheap and easy way to be able to test it. So we have paper prototypes where you just draw it, whatever you're thinking, and then you present it to someone. Storyboarding and digital prototypes. Let's not really think this through too much, because it's as simple as I'm describing. It's just trying to put your idea in a visible and testable way so your users and your audience can test it and visualize it.
Sorry, question.
Yes.
But then prototypes usually, are they going to do, I mean, if they're like apps and stuff, you do it on paper or you use an application?
For apps, we have three ways of doing it. We have lo-fi, mid-fi, and hi-fi. Usually when you're starting to think about an idea, you're going to do it a lo-fi, which is just black and white, and then you draw it in paper, pen and paper, and then you give it to the person to test it. The idea is that you give them a story that they have to follow, or they have to follow a specific process. Let's say, try to buy a plant online, and then the person is going to follow that. So it needs to be primitive enough that you don't spend a lot of time doing it, but it needs to be clear enough that the person understands how they can buy the plant on it. Okay. The middle is just a bit better, where you add some colors and some shapes, and the hi-fi is a really digital and full-blown prototype that you can actually click on things and see interactions, and you usually spend a lot more time doing it. For offline products, for physical products, it's actually the model, the 3D model of the product they're envisioning. It's just a way of letting the user touch it and click it and play with it and try to accomplish a specific task.
Okay, perfect.
Great. So as I said, don't spend too much time in it. Make it in a way so other people can test it. And don't worry about making it pretty. That's not the purpose, at least not in this stage. And finally, the testing. The testing is, the primary thing about testing is to collect insights that will help you correct issues and maybe see your product in a different way. So maybe you thought, okay, maybe a green CTA here makes sense. I like the green CTA here, but your user is going to say, I didn't even see it. I saw everything else, but I didn't see that CTA. So this is the way you're going to find out this information. The main thing about testing is that you're supposed to show the product to the user. If it's online, better. If it's offline, also good. But you should show it and not tell anything about the product to them. They should be able to understand it without any type of explanation. Then you ask them to talk through their experience. So just say, oh, I saw this button here. I think this button does this. If I click this, it does that. If I do that, it does that. It's just a way of also observing how they're operating through the prototype. And always make sure that you follow up with questions. Ask about their experience, how they felt about it, if they liked it, if they didn't like it. Just another way to gather insights that will help you out. Cool. We're done with the UX part, with the design thinking part. Does anyone have any question? Awesome.
Yeah, sorry, of course. In sometimes you have to work together with a developer and back developer, or it is not necessary.
For the design thinking part, for what we call the UX part, no. Of course, you need to understand what are your possibilities in terms of technology, especially when you're designing for digital products. So you're not going to create an Android app if your product is an Apple app. But you don't actually have to work with the developers.
Okay, of course.
Yeah, this
only the design up to now.
Exactly, only the designs up to now. Also, this next part I'm going to describe, which is the visual part. You also need to understand a little bit of what are your possibilities, but you don't actually need the opinion of the developers in any point. They don't need to give you any specific insight in here.
Then I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I saw, like, for example, UX usually is divided by UX design and UX research.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a thing, or they usually combine in one, or they separate them?
Yeah, I would also talk about that, but just to answer your question, that is a thing. That also depends on the company you're working for. So if you're working at Google, for example, it's quite common that you will see a very, very big division of jobs. So there will be someone working only in the research part, in the interviews, in the survey. Then there will be someone only thinking about ideas, someone only thinking about prototypes. So it's quite common to see a lot of titles, and all of these titles are within user experience design. UI design is a position, for example. There are people only focusing in the visuals. These are usually graphic designers, people that have background in graphic design, but not necessarily. But yeah, it's quite common to see this division of jobs. For startups, you will see that people are called UX UI designers, and they're probably doing everything and a bit more. It's quite common also to see UX UI developers. So developers that are able to do all of this that we just said, all the visuals, and also implement the product. That's another level in my opinion, but that also exists. And there's also, you mentioned about your partner that is a data science. There's also a UX scientist or a UX analyst, which is a background in data analysis working with UX UI processes.
Okay.
That also exists, yes. Great. So this final part, and I promise that I won't take much longer, is just the visual part. The visual part is nothing without all the work that we've done prior in the design thinking process. You will hear this quite often, that the UI doesn't exist with the UX, and the UX honestly will not exist with the UI if you're working with digital products. The UI is the first impression, is the thing that the user sees when they have to interact with the product. The user will not see why you put that CTA in that place. They just want to click on it. That's their only concern. Their goal is to finish the process and leave happy. That's it. So what are the elements of UI design? What are the elements of the interfaces? The main elements are typography, color, interface patterns, so common design patterns that have been used so many times that people just repeat it, and crap principles, which even though they're called crap, they just guarantee that your design is not going to be crap, basically. So typography, I'm not going to go into typography theory, but I'm going to leave you these three tools which help you if you don't understand anything about typography and you just want to get some references and some ideas for fonts for your products. These are three great tools that will help you either find good fonts or get references from websites that you like. So let's say you love Airbnb and you want to find out the font that they're using. Fonts Ninja is a great scanner. So you just put it into your Chrome and you can scroll to their website and find the fonts that they're using. You can also save it. It's a very cool font. Google Fonts is not necessarily a very loved tool by designers, because what Google Fonts does is get information of the fonts that are being most used. It doesn't mean that they're the best fonts. So always double check to see if it makes sense with your design, if it makes sense with your audience. But if you have nowhere to go and if you don't know how to start, Google Fonts is a good start. Then we have colors. Colors is a very, very hard topic if you're not a graphic designer, if you don't have a visual background. I have a really hard time with colors. So I usually go for references. Dribbble is a great place to see references for UI. And it's just a network for designers, especially UI designers. So if you want to see what other companies are, what type of colors other companies are using and just references of color palettes, Dribbble is a very good place. Colors is a website that gives you ideas for palettes, and you can also test it. It's a very fun tool. So if you're having issues, if you have a really good color in mind that you want to use it, but you don't know how to combine it, Colors is a good website. And Color Hunt gives you inspiring color palettes and also gives you good references to look through. So it gives you the most popular color palettes or just some ideas that you can look through. Interface patterns. Interface patterns, as I said, is just design patterns. It's quite common for the big companies like Google, Android, and Apple to have their defined guidelines, design guidelines. And if you're going to design for an Apple application, for example, you have to follow their patterns. You have to follow their structure to design an application. Of course, you can go free on your colors and your typography, but the way things are going to look is actually quite similar for one or for the other, for the Android or for the Apple or for Google. And basically what interface patterns are is just help you start, if you have no idea, to help you start thinking about design in a different way. So I remember that in Planet Venus, there was a discussion about the CTA. CTA is a thing that we study a lot. We try to understand where to place it and how it's best converted. Nowadays, there's some quite specific patterns of how to use a CTA. And if you're in doubt, just follow them and it will certainly work out. And finally, CREP principles. CREP principles is just a short for 4 words, which are contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. And I used Airbnb because they have a great CREP principle example. So you will see here, contrast is just basically this difference. You'll see that the main title has a heavier weight typography and subtitle has a lighter weight typography. It just gives us hierarchical appearance. Repetition, as you will see, the groups are always the same. So you understand that they're a group and that they're going to repeat themselves. They're going to actually tell you the same information whenever they look the same. Alignment, you can see that everything is aligned to the left. This not only looks nicer, but it helps the user read the information. So if you're in doubt in alignment, I will always tell you, never centralize text, always align it either to the left or to the right. It's just a matter of readability, just allowing the user to read the content faster. And proximity, As you can see, you can tell that these things are all in the same category, and there's probably the exact same group of things below it. It just helps the user understand that they go all together and they're all part of the same information. So this is a very fast crash course on UI. If you have any questions, this is the moment. And if the graphic designers have something to add, please, because I don't have a background on graphic design. The UI design is actually something that I'm not so good at.
Well, I was just going to ask you, you're just focused on UX or you work both on UX and UI?
I work both. And as a matter of fact, right now at the job that I am right now, I'm mostly focusing on UI because they thought, okay, you need to learn more, so just do that. But I know that there's a lot of path along the way that I have to do. This is just practicing and practicing and practicing and looking at references. I do miss a little bit of theory, especially when it comes to color theory. But it's something that with practice will come, hopefully.
Yes, because it looks like the UX part is super big and there are lots of things to do rather than in UI. No?
Yeah.
Or it's just because of the presentation timing. I'm not sure, but it seems like the UX part is huge.
Yeah, it is very, very huge, and it's the most time consuming. Nowadays in the UI design world, there's one thing called design system that actually speeds the process of UI in a great way, actually. So you can already define a lot of things, the color, the sizing of things, the buttons that you're going to use. And when you're creating screens, you just draw it from the system, and it's super, super easy. I find the UI more fun, to be honest, because you can play around with colors. But yeah, the UX is a bit longer. It's a longer phase usually.
Okay.
Just a question. So when you do UX UI, how would you say how long you take, I don't know, in research, and then how long you take, is there like timings? Like you spend, I don't know, like 30% of your time on research?
That will depend on the project that you're working for. In our case, and I can give you a practical example, we have a project manager that defines these tasks. Usually we spend 4 to 6 weeks in research, and then we have a month of delivery for the UI design. So research usually takes a bit longer. But this just depends on the product that you're working for. There's also the case that you get a project where there's a lot of there's a lot of information already in your table, so you don't really have to do a lot of research. For example, the redesign project I'm doing with Clara, there's so many things, so many references, so much information available that we don't really have to spend a whole month only doing research. It just comes a bit quicker. If you're trying to invent something new, research is going to take longer. And then just to go back, Clara, to your point, I finalized the presentation giving you a little bit of idea of everything that goes inside of user experience. So all of these are possible titles of user experience designers. And usually UX is the main part of it. User experience is always there because that's the main reference they have to produce the work that they're doing. They need all the insights before they define anything. But there's also designers like the motion designers, for example, they're very much focused in the visuals, and not only in the visuals, they're focused in the interaction. So the animations, the way the screens move, in 3Ds, in videos and stuff like that. One of the most generic way of describing a UX designer is product designer. A product designer needs to have a very big insight of the business too, because he will probably know the budgets that are available, the resources available. So it's a bit of a broader term. All the other ones are a bit more specific, but they are all part of the user experience world. And that's it for me. I hope that was not too much or enough that you can use it. And if you have any questions, just feel free to ask them.
For me, it was super useful. I was just thinking about what would happen with the person in charge of designing all the copies related to the product you're selling. But now I see that you also add the UX copywriter.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's
that would be
also
the
one
first.
title. Yes, and that's actually a very specific field in UX because the copywriter for UX is very different than copywriter for marketing materials or for branding, for stuff like that. Because the copywriting in UX is an active voice where you instruct the user to take a specific action. You're not necessarily selling the brand or trying to make it appealing. You're just giving very clear instructions where no one is going to have any doubts around what to do.
Okay, perfect.
I have a question. I guess it's more personal, but if you're to change and do UX, do you recommend doing a boot camp or courses or a bit of everything?
I did a boot camp, and for me it was very, very useful. We're actually going to have a talk about switching to UX on the 13th of October if you want to join.
Cool, yeah.
The bootcamp, if you have the time and the financial resources to do it, I recommend it because it's just a very intensive environment and it kind of forces you to collaborate in a very pressure mode. It's a bit of a forced way of learning, but for me, it was the only way I would do it. I think if I had to try to learn every single thing on my own, I don't know if I would have the determination. If you are a self-learner, if you can pace yourself and you can do it on your own, I can guarantee you that there's a lot of information online. And I actually know a lot of people that did the transition without any bootcamp. So it's also possible to do it without the bootcamp.
Okay, thank you.
So any other questions?
For me, no question. Just I really learned the difference between UI and UX because not being much involved in that topic, I found it really insightful to understand the differences between those two fields as well.
Maybe Ananda, you want to make a reminder for the next webinar that you're offering in Planet Venus so that we can join you?
So yeah, so as I was mentioning, we're going to do a talk about switching to UX UI. I just did it. I recently done it actually, and I have it very fresh on my mind. So I feel that I can help out with this, but it's just going to be a talk on better practices. And if you're curious about UX projects, you can go on to my website, Ananda Mele, and see some case studies that I've done in the bootcamp specifically, just to understand everything that I said here as a theory, just to understand it in practice. It might help you visualize everything that was said today.
Perfect. Deborah, we can hear you.
Deborah's a mute.
Always the same.
Really, Ananda was really, really nice. I'm gonna re-look again because for me it really was super new. I'm looking also for your next event, and I also would like to invite all the participants of the events today. Next Thursday, we are doing the last events of e-commerce with Laura, and she's gonna offer 30 minutes for free if somebody want to have some questions about e-commerce. It will be very interesting.
Perfect.
Cool. Thanks for having me, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I'm available in the network or on my email. Feel free to reach out.
Cool.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Ananda was wonderful.
Super nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Thank
day.
you.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Ahora os veo todas. Que no os veía a medias solo.